Hey, what's up guys? Today I'll show you a horror drama film, Moui, The Legend of a Portrait. Spoiler ahead, watch out and take care. The movie begins with a rich girl returning home terrified. She scans her house as she searches for something. Sizzling steam rises from the ground and she stares at the mirror in the hall to see her sweat ruining her makeup. She glances beside her and screams as an unknown entity lunges toward her. Centuries later, a young girl working as a writer watches the professor's documentary on her computer about the curse of Moui, a haunting ghost. The video includes the Vietnamese's response that Mui's curse exists for traitors. It also shows the elder, who angrily scatters the children after singing a song about Moui. After the clips with the elder, the footage suddenly goes static. Later, the writer meets her former schoolmates, Song and Hoon, to borrow a camera for documentation. She plans to travel to Vietnam and meet with her old friend, Yoon, to acquire information about the legend of Moui. Strangely, Song calls out the writer's audacity for teaming up with Yoon, because 3 years ago she wrote insults to Yoon in her published book, Lies and Secrets. However, the writer is confident that Yoon doesn't know the book since she's in Vietnam, and she insists on writing about the story of Moui for the sake of keeping her job. Then Song takes a photo with her boyfriend Hoon first, then lends it to the writer, attempting to show it to Yoon to make her jealous of their intimate relationship. It's revealed that the boyfriend had betrayed Yoon in the past. The following day, the writer receives a call from her editor, demanding a new book to be released or else she'll lose the job. On January 10th, the writer arrives in Vietnam and meets Yoon outside the airport. They embrace after 3 years of missing each other. Afterward, they leave the airport by taxi. The writer reads a Vietnam history book given by Yoon inside the car to learn the culture. Later, Yoon shows a family picture including Moui in a postboard in a park, explaining that Moui was just an average child. Later, they stay in a resort, learning more about Mui's story. According to legend, the villagers feared Moui, so the monks sealed her spirit in a portrait. However, the curse began when the seal came undone. The curse is cast on the 15th of the full moon that lasts for 15 days, but the curse's indication and how the seal is lifted are still unknown. The writer is skeptical about why there are no witnesses, and Yoon responds, nobody would have survived if the legend's true. Yoon then shares that she writes subtitles for the professor's broadcasted videos. The professor studies Vietnamese folklore, thus originating his obsession with Mui's story. The writer wants to talk with the professor, but Yoon says he's in South Korea now. When Yoon asks about their friend Hoon and Song, the writer lies by saying she lost contact with them and leaves to their rented room. That night, supernatural events occur. Yoon's asleep while the writer enjoys solidarity, but a showerhead suddenly opens by itself. The doorbell unexpectedly chimes repeatedly. The showerhead reopens again, making the writer creep out and sees Mui's haunting face behind the shower room's glass door. She backwardly staggers onto the bed, waking Yoon, but she sees Moui beside her. The writer falls off the bed, runs to the door, and Yoon unexpectedly enters the room after checking the nearby vacant rooms. The writer stutters in disbelief but smiles, brushing off what happened earlier. On January 11th, they travel to Yoon's mansion in the mountains. Yoon shares that her father bought the estate after learning a French military officer built it. Yoon tours the writer around the mansion, advising her not to enter the painting room. After settling down, they travel to Mui's house by boat. The writer takes a photo of Yoon, then sits beside her. Mui's story continues. She suffered from loneliness as villagers avoided her. Therefore, her love bloomed for a painter, for he willingly painted her portrait. However, he left her later, and the portrait was left incomplete, since he was engaged with a rich girl. However, he left her ring for Moui before his departure. Then, Moui had to endure the pain of not keeping the portrait, believing that it would cause trouble for her. It turns out, the painter's rich fiancé is actually the rich girl shown at the beginning of the film. She spread rumors about Moui upon learning she stole her lover, so she ordered men to break her ankle, causing her limp. She even broke Mui's finger to remove the painter's gift ring and threw acid to destroy Mui's face. Being embarrassed to show her bloody face to the painter, Moui hung herself on lunar calendar's 15th at the tree inside her house. Since then, she has become a ghost seeking revenge. Back in the present time, the writer takes pictures as she explores the house, including Mui's portrait on the wall. They eventually return home, where Yoon gives the writer more Mui's files to study. Night comes. Yoon sketches her painting's base. Meanwhile, the writer studies Mui's files when suddenly the attic's wallpaper peels off the wall, and she immediately sticks it back. On January 12th, they visit the professor to retrieve his research book about Moui. The professor's secretary keeps the keys to the bathroom and office, so the writer pretends to relieve herself, and so sneaks into the professor's office. Eventually, the writer successfully steals Mui's book from the office, hides it in her bag, and returns the keys to the secretary. Afterward, the writer reads Mui's book. According to the book, during World War II's ending, a Japanese major led the Japanese soldiers to rob Mui's portrait from the temple. He sliced off the leader monk who stopped him and faced Mui's painting with the long pin pinned onto Mui's heart. He removed the pin that served as a seal, which however unleashed Mui's curse. According to the legend, the one who lifted the pin could ask Moui to seek revenge for them, but in exchange for a cost. The cost was to let Moui take over the body who unsealed her. Afterward, they visit a museum where a local painter had painted a copy of Mui's portrait. However, the local painter forbids them because looking at Mui's eyes can make them feel Mui's presence. But Yoon convinces the local painter by lying that the writer has been cursed. They face the portrait copy, a sheet covering Mui's eyes, and the writer takes a photo of it. However, she believes that the copy is a hoax because she took a picture of it in Mui's house. However, when they check the camera, they find nothing in the supposed Mui's image. She searches the camera's gallery, only to see Hoon and Song's picture. Yoon leaves the museum speechless, possibly because of the couple's photo, and also because the writer went to the forbidden painting room to find Mui's portrait. Yoon's face goes serious, warning the writer that she's been cursed by Moui already, but she eventually cracks a laugh and says she's only joking. That night, they drink with Yoon's two Vietnamese friends, when suddenly, a foreigner invites Yoon to dance. Despite the writer's advice not to dance, Yoon still joins the foreigner. So the writer drinks shots while glaring at Yoon. She eventually goes outside the bar and Yoon follows her. Right then, the writer blurts out something odd. The rumors are only true about you, making Yoon stunned. They eventually return home, where the writer experiences a false awakening while asleep. She first dreams of a silhouette dashed into the shadowy hall and finds a little Moui crying in the park, who faces her, revealing a scarred face. She wakes up in the second dream where Yoon ties her on the bed, cuts her hair, and splashes a bottle of acid onto her face, blaming the writer for all the pains she had gone through. On January 13th, the writer wakes up screaming because of the nightmare. She then joins Yoon for breakfast in the garden and apologizes for bringing up a sensitive topic at the bar, which Yoon gladly forgives. Their conversation moves toward the writer's progress in her book, but she feels the acquired information is insufficient. The writer feels that Mui's jealousy and grudges are petty motives to seek revenge against the people who wronged her, but that upsets Yoon, thinking that the writer is invalidating the sufferings of Moui who got poorly treated, and that people like the writer are the exact ones who caused Moui to curse for revenge. After their tense talk in the morning, the writer prints out a Mui's image she captured from the museum yesterday. Suddenly, the wallpaper peels off again. Afterward, the writer asks local people about Mui's in the street. However, no one recognizes her. Suddenly, an elder grabs the writer's wrist, but she eventually escapes the elder's grip. But she searches for the elder again after realizing it's the person from the professor's documentary. The writer is desperate, so she visits the professor's secretary at school, where she cleans her office and gives her green scarf to the secretary. The secretary momentarily gives in and reveals that Yoon is the reason for the professor's obsession with Moui, and that Yoon was pretty sick before, who miraculously becomes healthy after months. The secretary then offers the writer a tour tomorrow in the professor's house. Meanwhile, Yoon's two Vietnamese friends prepare the table for the wine party on the lawn. The writer visits Yoon, sitting behind the bed's thin drapes. She's about to leave when Yoon hums unexpectedly. So she approaches, seeing her feet dangling on edge. She swipes the drape away to see Yoon's back, but she glances below to see the feet disappear. A hand suddenly grabs the writer's shoulder. She then sees Yoon in a white dress. The writer, Yoon, and her two friends eat dinner that night. The writer unexpectedly brings up Yoon's sickness, who became healthy in months. Unfortunately, rain falls, and the two Vietnamese friends rush inside, while Yoon smiles at the writer before leaving the table. Afterward, the writer dries herself in the bedroom. The lights flicker, and faint breathing comes out of the blue. She searches the house for the origin, and finds Yoon's Vietnamese friends speaking to her in Hangul. However, they say to her that it's her who's speaking Vietnamese. She glances onto the mirror, seeing Mui's reflection holding the writer's photograph. She faces the two Vietnamese friends. Their appearance changes into dark demons, and they hiss at her. The writer wakes up in front of the laptop. On hand is Mui's printed portrait. Once again, she goes down the attic and follows the sizzling footprints into Yoon's bedroom. She checks Yoon's feet are clean, and the footprints disappear on the floor. On January 14th, the writer and the secretary visit the professor's house. It turns out the professor didn't return to South Korea because the secretary kept his passport, meaning Yoon lied to them. Inside the professor's house, the writer learns something new. Mui's curse indications are burning body sensation, being watched, hummed at, and seeing Mui's reflection instead of herself. Afterward, the elder's footage comes up again with translation, "Don't wake up Moui or you'll die." The writer goes home and visits Yoon in the painting room. where she finds dark-colored theme paintings, and at the end of the room is Yoon's portrait. Beside Yoon's self-portrait is the Lies and Secret book. The writer discovers Yoon read her book and even underlined the description she wrote. Right then, Yoon enters the room, confessing how the writer's words made her doubt herself. The writer bravely confronts Yoon about her plan to curse her and uses Mui's book to bait her into coming to Vietnam. However, Yoon firmly believes she invites the writer and she's not going to curse her. Yoon then stands beside her self-portrait, asking the writer if they're look-alike. The writer packs her things, but Yoon invites her to reminisce one last time. It's revealed that Song and Hoon recorded 3 thugs who sexually assaulted Yoon. They distributed the video throughout the people, thus leading Yoon to move out of South Korea. The writer tearfully apologizes to Yoon for writing a book based on lies. They reconcile, and Yoon gives her mother's ring to the writer because she has wanted it for a long time since they were kids. Yoon then tells her to visit the temple tomorrow to learn more about the curse. They later sleep beside each other, when suddenly Yoon stiffly shakes on the bed and gasps as she asks for help. Mui's spirit starts taking over Yoon's body. On January 15th, Yoon falls ill, and the writer visits the temple with the professor's secretary. Upon arriving, numerous portraits of the horrifying folklore creatures stand before them, and among them is Mui's missing picture. The 2 women talk with the leader monk sitting behind a thin curtain. In a flashback, the painter and his rich fiancée called the leader monk to trap Mui's spirit, so they used the painter as bait by summoning Mui's spirit to finish her painting. Mui appeared, but monks surrounded her and performed a ritual to seal her in the unfinished portrait. Mui screamed in pain as she slowly transferred into the painting. When she was trapped, they stabbed the portrait's heart with a long pin. Now the leader monk requests the writer to end the curse by stabbing the pin into the current body of Mui, which is the possessed Yoon. The professor's secretary advises the writer to return to South Korea because everything's only a legend. However, the secretary dies after evading the vendor who blocked her way. The writer arrived to save her, but it was too late because the green scarf on her neck got stuck and tightened as the wheels spun. The writer returns to Yoon's estate, trying to stab Yoon with a pin. She arrives in the attic and removes the peeling wallpaper off the wall, revealing a door. She opens it and finds the professor dead, with acid melted on his face. She picks the Japanese major's photo in front of Yoon's current house, tucks in the professor's clothes, and reads the written words. Death begins the curse. She then enters beyond the wall, seeing darkness, dirt, roots, cobwebs fill the walls. She plays the abandoned tape recorder where the professor explains Mui's portrait hidden in the Japanese major's house. This tells why Yoon bought the house. In that way, Yoon unleashed and became Mui, and her sickness suddenly disappeared because of that. The professor then chants to call Mui's spirit. Every step she makes produces a sizzling sound. At the end of the hall, the ring given by Yoon becomes the ring that Mui received from the painter, and Mui's portrait comes to life. The writer escapes as Mui limps towards her, but she gets stuck midway and even tries to remove her shoes. Mui suddenly disappears, and darkness surrounds her further. The only thing left is the news used by Mui and Yoon standing in the room. Yoon convinces the writer that one of them should die and repeatedly shouts at the writer to stab her. Mui's face appears again, so the writer quickly stabs her and cries. But Yoon only laughs because thanks to the writer, her death activates the curse on January 15th. The writer who cast the curse now must allow Mui to possess her body as the price. It can be surmised that Yoon's death activates a new curse, making Mui take over the writer's body to take revenge for Yoon's past sufferings in South Korea. The movie ends with Mui in the writer's body, returning back to South Korea and avenging everyone who had done terrible things to Yoon. Mui first kills the 3 thugs who still watch the clip of assaults on Yoon. She then chokes Song and hangs Hoon in the park where he betrayed Yoon. After all done, Mui burns all of her documents and smiles grimly, as no one can learn the truth about her now. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.